Will there be a couch burning this weekend in Morgantown? Gus's seat is hot. The Mountaineers are trying to make it hotter.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you for making Locked On UCF your first listen up every day. We may be your first listen, but we're going to give the last word to my good friend Andrew Glucko from The Last Word on Sports. It's been a quiet off week for the Knights, but they got West Virginia, and they're going to the mountains where, for some reason, they burn couches.
Couch burning experience of Morgantown. It's from time immemorial. It's just something special. And you know, with Gus being on the hot seat already, this, you know, the universe conspires, and this can't be coincidence at this point.
I agree. Gus's seat will certainly be on fire, courtesy of the Mountaineers. If UCF loses this one, it's going to be a tough out. But who do we watch here when the Knights visit the Mountaineers? Well, let's talk about this for a second. Our players to watch on our Metric Mondays. This is our UCF Metric Mondays, brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Please go check them out. Here's who we got here. Andrew, quarterback Garrett Greene is a runner. He is averaging quite a few yards per attempt, but the run game shines in Morgantown.
Yeah, and the thing is, UCF has a history of struggling against dual threat quarterbacks, and Greene his run for 600 yards this year. You know, this is a guy who can tuck the ball and run. And granted, prior to last week, you know, he had some concussion issues, missed a bit of time, but he came back last week and looked about as good as he normally is. He's a 50% passer, give or take. He's not going to win with his arm. He's going to win with his legs. This is a running team, not to the extent that UCF is, but this is not a team that's going to win in the air.
I agree. Look, Garrett Greene, I mean, he's a decent dual threat quarterback here. And UCF defensively, they're going to have to keep contained on him. They're going to have to spy on him maybe a little bit and keep him in the pocket. Look, they're not leading the conference in rushing, but JAHEIM White is their leading rusher on the season. White is in the 600-yard range too, I believe, in terms of total rush yards on the season.
Yeah, and you have two running backs. You have White, and you also have C.J. Donaldson, and they complement each other very well to the point where their Pro Football Focus grade is nearly identical. You're talking 67.8 versus 67.7. Granted, how they compose those numbers differ, but this is a very comparable backfield, much like how UCF started the season with a lot more balance. This is an incredibly balanced running duo for the Mountaineers.
Then our third person to watch here is TJ Jackson, defensive lineman number 11, 5.5 sacks on the season. I believe he also leads West Virginia in tackles for loss.
This is a very talented defensive end, an edge rusher. He's tied for team lead in tackles, and I've always said, there's always a degree of concern when the guy who leads the team in tackles is a defensive back. And who's he tied with? A defensive back. However, to have an edge rusher, doing what he does and, create a lot of tackles for loss. This is a very, very talented guy. Best defender on Pro Football Focus for their defensive squad. He got an 82.4 overall ranking. This is a guy that will probably end up, in the depth chart somewhere, eventually on Sundays. And, this is a defense that gives up a lot of yards. They give up 400 yards per game. UCF's not as, it doesn't give up nearly as many. They're about 355 or so. So this is a much maligned defensive unit, and Jackson's really the bright spot of the whole thing.
Yeah, look, now on the UCF side, we wanted to make sure our listeners are aware of who to watch for West Virginia. But on the UCF side, obviously, we're going to be keeping an eye on Dylan Rizk. He took over the starting job a few games ago, got his first action in the fourth quarter versus BYU, did extremely well, and Gus rolled the dice on him. RJ Harvey is no secret to anybody at this point in the season. He's dynamic. I believe he's the nation's third leading rusher at this point. Ashton Jinsey is miles ahead of everybody right now. I think he's gonna clear 2,000 yards easily this season. But RJ Harvey is an extremely efficient back at 1,328 yards on the season, 6.8 yards per carry. Now that's where I like. We're going to talk about rushing yards later in the show, but certainly West Virginia is going to key in on trying to stop RJ Harvey.
Well, and UCF's offense is made and broken with RJ Harvey in the backfield. Leads the team, 196 rushes. I mean, the next closest guy is KJ Jefferson, and he hasn't played in a month. So not a lot of carries by other players. 1,328 yards. The next closest guy is Jacurri Brown with 354. I mean, that's almost 1,000 yards right there. This is – well, Miles Montgomery comes in and spells a little bit, and you get a little bit of Johnny Richardson in there. This is a RJ Harvey show, and if he can't get the ball moving downfield, this team's in trouble. We've seen that. We've also seen where maybe in a rough first half, a great second half, or vice versa. It all depends on really how stacked the defense is in the box against UCF. That's where a player like Dylan Rizk comes in handy, because unlike the other quarterbacks, he is a passing threat, and you are forced to become a little bit honest. Maybe instead of having 8 guys in the box, you got to drop it down to 7, and that allows a player like Harvey, who doesn't need a lot of space, to do damage.
Well, speaking of Dylan Rizk and him being a threat with his arm through the air, UCF has 2 receivers who are averaging better than 15 yards per catch on the season in Jacoby Jones and Kobe Hudson. And I'm qualifying that these are receivers with at least 20 receptions on the season. Sometimes those numbers can be skewed. So one guy has 3 catches for 100 yards or something. But qualifying that with at least 20 catches at this point in the season, those guys are threats through the air when given a chance.
Well, Jacoby Jones, good wide receiver. He got hurt in Ohio last year. It took him a while to get kind of his sea legs back, regain his confidence. And he stepped in when Kobe Hudson got hurt and hasn't stopped. I mean, he led the team in reception in receiving for 2 straight games, and then was tied with Kobe Hudson in receptions. And I think he was 1 yard shy of Hudson last week's game. Well, the last game they played, obviously against Arizona State, they were off this past week, where Bye is undefeated. And, to see him rise up, it's a really cool story. We know what Kobe Hudson brings to the table, but to see Jacoby Jones just rise up and to use him like they did. He had 6 of his 7 catches against Arizona State were on 3rd or 4th down and resulted in first downs. A lot of back shoulder throws, and he was just a reception machine on those. So that's great game planning by Tim Harris, the offensive coordinator. And while Gus may not be the play caller, he's still involved with the game plan. And this was just excellent planning on the part of the UCF coaching staff to develop this. Obviously, now they're going to have to come up with a slightly different wrinkle. You're going a different team dynamic and everything, and you always have to keep changing it up. But Rizk's accuracy on those back shoulder throws was pretty good.
Yeah, they're going to need a lot of energy and enthusiasm in the rush game, I think, going into this one, and knowing that West Virginia is going to key in on trying to stop that. We're going to talk about what can help them with that right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at 5 Hour Energy. Now, I know you're a monster guy, but sometimes I can't take an energy drink. I need something quick. I don't have time to down a whole energy drink. And that's where our friends, Andrew, at 5 Hour Energy come in. They know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life, and it takes a lot of energy to power through all the tailgates and touchdowns and screaming at your TV and telling your dog to go outside, which is why they've created the Stand, the 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel. The energy shot made just for super fans like you, like me, and like everybody watching this show. The fans who are first in the parking lot and who are first to leave, we see you. Look, 5 Hour Energy knows no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy, whether you are prepping for a big tailgate or ironing your jersey. I don't iron my jersey. However, your to-do list will always be a mile long, and that's why the limited Stand, the 5 Hour Energy Shot, is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with 5 Hour Energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com and shipped nationwide. The run game. How do they stack up? How do these two teams stack up? Well, we prepared a little graphic here for you at Locked On UCF on Metric Mondays to see how West Virginia and UCF stack up in the rush game. Andrew, taking a look here, UCF is a much better team running the ball. Now, we talked about Greene being an effective runner at quarterback. Dylan Rizk is no statue, but RJ Harvey, I think, is the difference here between these two teams.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he has 1,300 yards on the season. That's half of UCF's entire output, which includes quarterbacks, other running backs. He's got almost half the output in rushing, and his 6.8 average per carry, it carries that team literally and not literally. Symbolically, this team is really the RJ Harvey show. He's not only the player that's front and center on the field, but from an off the field standpoint, this guy is just everything you want in a football player, personality wise, character. I mean, he's just this team. He's the soul of the team this year. You find that one guy that you just latch on to, like UCF fans would remember. Shaquem Griffin was the soul of the football team during their championship run in 2017. RJ Harvey is the soul of the team this season. Just kind of a never say die. Just won't quit even if things go wrong. And talk quietly and carry a big stick. Just an amazing young man. I've had a chance to talk to him. He's just a really, really swell guy. This is the RJ Harvey show, and we're just spectators for. But on West Virginia's side, you have a more balanced attack. You've got Greene at quarterback, and he's going to tuck the ball and run. He's going to get you at least 80 yards a game. He had over 120 this past week against Baylor. But you have Donaldson, you have White. This is a good running game, but it's split across multiple pieces as opposed to a single point like you have with Harvey.
When we talk about these numbers, again, the totals can fool you sometimes, but I think yards per average, yards per average rush is something that I look at to see how efficient are they in the running game. Going back here, 5.1 average yards per rush is nothing to sneeze at. 6.8 is obviously a lot better. Football can be a game of inches sometimes, and gaining almost just under a whole 2 yards more per rush for UCF, I think is significant here. They've rushed for just under 700 more yards on the season, and that's with RJ Harvey being 50% of that output. Now, you got another 1,300 yards here that are coming from other places. Now, early in the season, you had Jacurri Brown, who had some big rushing games. Obviously, again, I mentioned Dylan Rizk is no statue back there. He'll take off on you if you don't keep contain on him. But this is advantage. I mean, I want to end this segment talking about, is this advantage UCF here in the run game, or is it a wash, or is this advantage Mountaineers in your mind?
Oh, well, the thing about UCF's run game is they're I guess prone's not the right word, but they have this knack of finding the big play. West Virginia, not as much. The longest rush that they've had all year is 55 yards, which is great and all. But UCF has 3 players that have done that and then some. You have Harvey, Penny Boone, and Jacurri Brown have all had plays longer than that 55. You go down the list, and you're going to see a lot of 10+ yard plays. Heck, in UCF's case, they have a lot of 20+ yard plays. RJ Harvey he creates a lot of big play opportunities. Again, doesn't require a lot of space to make it happen, which is why you can use a flawed offensive line like what UCF has to make things happen. And that's one of the things that West Virginia has a decisive advantage of, is they have a pair of offensive tackles that are really good. And, that offensive line can make or break the difference in this run games.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch this year, because to me, this is the extreme advantage UCF. Gus's team has not lacked the ability to run the ball at times. I just think at the ends of games when they've needed big plays through the air, it's been difficult to find them before Dylan Rizk. So we're going to talk about the passing game and what UCF can do here right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. No line on this one, but if you had to guess, what do you think this line sits at here?
I would give, to open it, I'd say West Virginia by 2. They got that home field advantage.
Okay.
That's pretty much a pick-even game.
Yep.
There's still some variables coming into the week, but I think after last week, UCF's rested, and I think in a good position. West Virginia's got the red flags up, because they only got 2 games left, and they're not bowl eligible yet. So both teams are still fighting for their postseason lives. So there's going to be that degree of desperation. At least West Virginia does have a game to give, but then they have to travel to Lubbock, Texas for Texas Tech. And we all know traveling to Lubbock is not an easy thing to do.
Well, look, if this is a pick 'em, no matter what side of the line you decide to bet on, go check out our friends at FanDuel. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. This episode of Locked On UCF is also brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time has a new they've got a new thing that they call Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. It filters out all the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets, Andrew. You get to curate it to make it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedies, theater. They got all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. My biggest bugaboo with buying tickets online is finding out that it's going to be $50 more than what I thought it was going to be. They've got a low price guarantee that will credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. What time is it, Andrew?
It's game time.
The passing game. Neither of these teams has been great passing the ball. However, that was before Dylan Rizk showed up. Sheriff Rizk showed up to town, and I think this might actually be advantage UCF in this one with Dylan Rizk at quarterback. Before we get to the numbers here, what do you think? Garrett Greene versus Dylan Rizk. Which one of these guys has the better arm?
Oh, it's Dylan Rizk easily. Garrett Greene, you're going to be lucky to get 50% passing on the day. He averages under 200 yards per game, while Dylan Rizk also averages under 200 yards a game. That's partially because he had garbage time against BYU, and there wasn't a chance to get anywhere close to that. But here's the one big stat you keep in mind. Garrett Greene, 54.9. Dylan Rizk, 72.9. That's your completion percentage, and that's where the big difference is.
Well, let's take a look at the numbers on the season. Both of these teams averaging just about 202 yards per game. through the air. West Virginia's thrown it a tad bit more. This averages out to maybe like 2 or 3 more passes per game, not a ton. Average yards per attempt, 8.1 versus 7.5. Again, fairly even. And total passing yards also fairly even. On the season, though.
Now, there's one thing to keep in mind is your turnovers, interceptions. UCF's quarterbacks all combined, 9 interceptions.
Okay.
Garrett Greene by himself, 9 interceptions.
There you go.
He's only thrown 11 touchdowns to UCF's 12, but Dylan Rizk has a 4-to-1 ratio going into this game.
He's got 1 interception. He's got 1. Yeah.
And we know about that 1.
Right.
Still small sample size, but that's almost 73% completion rate shows that he's making more accurate throws and maybe more sound decisions with the ball compared to Greene, who is more of a runner than a thrower.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is advantage UCF. Dylan Rizk changes the math. If we showed the season numbers. It's a smaller sample size, but I think we've seen enough of Dylan Rizk to know he's fairly accurate with the football. That almost 73% completion percentage speaks to efficiency. In throw, he's got 51 completions on the season against 70 attempts. And to me, that's pretty good. I mean, he's taken 4 sacks. He's only got 1 interception. They're a run-first team, but what you need from Dylan Rizk is you need big throws in key moments, and I think that he has the arm to get that done.
And the game plan, at least against Arizona State, wasn't, you have to be a hero. They were smart throws. They were timing throws, those back shoulder throws, and you have, as we've already talked about, 2 really good wide receivers in Jacoby Jones and Kobe Hudson. You also have Randy Pittman as a tight end who's a fantastic athlete all around, great blocker, great receiver. And then you have a Rizk out of the backfield. RJ Harvey's not a terrible pass-catching running back. John Richardson, a good pass-catching running back. So, I mean, you have options. Trent Whittemore is a pretty good 3rd wide receiver. So, I mean, you've got talent there. It's all about things coalescing. Like, this past, the last game against Arizona State, it wasn't the offense that lost this game. It was special teams.
Yeah.
It's like weird things happen. So they need the other parts of the team, the other parts of the game to come together and put something together. Because this season's not over yet. They're still playing for something, and they're good enough to win these last 2 games.
I agree. I think these aren't world beater opponents that you're going up against either. Now Morgantown is a tough place to go play, and clearly the smell of burning couches may scare some people off. But I think UCF has what it takes to go in there and get this one. Now, can they avoid the big mistakes on special teams like you talked about that plagued them last week? And can you continue to feed the ball to your monster and RJ Harvey? And can Dylan Rizk be efficient enough to win this one? They're getting after it defensively. They played well under Addison Williams. I think good enough to win games. You'd like to see them tighten up some things there. But I think they get it done here. We'll give our predictions later in the week when we go over passing depth numbers. But Andrew, before we get out of here, tell people where they can find you.
All right, you can catch me on Twitter /X at StatBoyDrew, and my writing at Last Word on College Football, part of the Last Word on Sports family.
Guys, that's it for another great edition of Locked On UCF. Thank you for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your second listen, go check out our friends over at the Big 12 podcast on YouTube. Our guy Drake Toll leads the conversation and conference realignment news and holds no punches when it comes to covering every team in the Big 12. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us right here tomorrow with more Locked On UCF.